Star Wars. To many of us, it was our childhood. Everything about space monks and laser swords with cool space battles will get us all hooked. And out of the entire Star Wars franchise, the prequels were the trilogy that really added depth to the Star Wars universe. It involved messy space politics with insane parallels, tragic fallen hero story, a galaxy-wide conflict called the Clone Wars, with battles involving hundreds of laser swords, space soldiers, and spaceships. The prequels are also one of the most debatable Star Wars films. You see, the original trilogy is filled with positivity and is something considered by many to be the best films ever made, which leaves the Star Wars prequels to live in its shadows for many years. However, in this video, I'm going to accept or deny some of the criticisms that surround the prequels. I'm also going to explain how George Lucas's inspiration to write Star Wars as a compilation of philosophy, religion, mythology, history, and politics made the prequels a work of art. To start with the very first film, in this movie, The Phantom Menace, a lot of the criticisms come in the forms of, oh, the movie is boring. It is dry, the acting is stiff, the dialogues were terrible, there is no connection to the characters whatsoever. The film overall was pretty bland, with no engagement to the audience. It was upsetting and failed to meet the expectations. Remember this word, expectations, because these expectations are what led the audience to feel disgraced. There's this psychological concept called the hedonic treadmill. The concept that happiness is always this thing that is dangling in our reach, yet we still cannot get a grasp of it, which teaches us to undermine these set expectations, because the expectations are what kills the fun. To be honest, The Phantom Menace wasn't a complete flop. It was in fact great and accomplished what it originally set out to achieve. The movie introduced us to the character of Anakin Skywalker and outlined his rough upbringings. It played with our heartstrings with the tragedy of Qui-Gon Jinn. The film also contained fun and intense scenes like the pod race scene or the Duel of the Fates, and was overall the laying grounds for the drama and conflict to ensue in the later films. In these types of films, where the aim is to lay a foundation for the drama to piece into the bigger picture, typically it involves the groundwork for the next films. So the endings normally contain mystery, foreshadowing, or uncertainty. You see, The Phantom Menace does start with the uncertainty of Anakin's future, with the death of Qui-Gon Jinn and Anakin's emotional turmoil to fit in as a Jedi. For everyone returning from the original trilogy, for those who knew that Anakin's future inevitably lies behind the mask of Darth Vader, they would naturally be curious on how this young boy turned into this evil cyborg. The Phantom Menace play into that world with, again, a decent introduction to the character of Anakin Skywalker. Although the popularity of The Phantom Menace comes from the hype and excitement of the fact that George Lucas is making another 3 Star Wars films, ironically what killed the film was its same excitement and set expectations, because of the sheer success of the original trilogy. All in all, The Phantom Menace was a pretty alright Star Wars film, whose criticisms grew loud due to the failure to live up to the lights of the original trilogy. I don't think I can defend the Attack of the Clones, guys.
I don't know why I keep dreaming about him. Dreams pass in time. I'd much rather dream about Padme.
But anyways, we have the second film of the trilogy, The Attack of the Clones. Overall, this is where the criticisms grew the loudest, with the acting, the plot, the overusage of CGI, the dialogue, and yes, especially the awkwardness with the romance between Anakin and Padme. The Attack of the Clones is the first time George Lucas ever made a romance feature in one of his films. I'm not trying to defend George Lucas and say that it is his first, so it is understandably bad. No. In fact, I'm trying to say that the romance scenes, although they would remind you of 2 middle school children flirting with each other, were actually quite poetic in a way. So here's a guy, a complete outcast, who grew up in slavery and is taken by an old wizard to join this weird religion that restricts any form of relationships or even emotions. And you expect him not to look like a robot when it comes to romance? George Lucas listened to our criticisms about the first film being too boring. So he said, hey, let's make this film less boring. So he added action scenes and explosions even right at the beginning of the film, with the assassination attempts on Padme and this investigation arc where Anakin and Obi-Wan had to hunt this bounty hunter throughout Coruscant. People also loved the Duel of the Fates, so George Lucas added more duels and fights like the Obi-Wan Jango fight or the Dooku Yoda duel. Again, this movie also contained a scene that played with our emotions a little. It was when Shmi died in Anakin's hands, which left Anakin in emotional turmoil and foreshadowed his descent into darkness later on. And the writing for the characters weren't so bad either. There are examples like how they included the connection, the bond and the brotherhood between Obi-Wan and Anakin over the years. Or again, the way Anakin acted in front of Padme, highlighting his obsession over her for many years by this point. To be honest, the film wasn't by any means perfect, and I do admit there were pretty bad flaws like the overusage of CGI. What really sets the Attack of the Clones apart from any other Star Wars films, however, is its romance feature. And to really enjoy this feature, I will paraphrase, quote, you have to see it as somewhat of a Shakespeare play, because you don't really watch a play like how you watch a MCU movie, quote, which is by Turf Nation, a fellow YouTuber. For the Revenge of the Sith, I won't be getting into the nitty-gritty, as we still have a lot to uncover. The reason is that this is the movie that has the least amount of criticism and is well respected by the audience. There are 3 things that make The Revenge of the Sith a fan favorite. 1. The themes of how liberty falls. 2. The tragedy of Anakin Skywalker and the way George Lucas took both the good aspects and the criticisms of the last films and fixed them. Hey, the dialogues aren't as bad anymore, and are even memorable in some parts. It builds up better character connections, emphasizing the bond and brotherhood between Anakin and Obi-Wan, just like in the last film. And the film also underlined the fact that it isn't just all tell and no show, so it included long takes for either cinematic purposes or to get into the audience's heart. But that is it for The Revenge of the Sith, as I don't have anything else to say about it any further. The most obvious correlation between Star Wars and social subjects are with archaeology and history. The Empire was inspired by the German Empire we see in our own timeline. The Imperial Star Destroyers were self-explanatorily inspired by the dreadnoughts we see in World War I. Even the name Stormtroopers were derived from the German Empire in the form of Sturmtruppen, which were specialized Imperial German infantry in World War I. This concept is further pushed by Disney with a correlation between the First Order and Nazi Germany. And also not to mention the references to the Vietnam War in the original trilogy, portraying the US as the Empire and the rebels as the Viet Cong. Before I get out of context, let's talk about the political, mythological, and references to religion in the prequels. The quite obvious reference to ancient religion is the character of Anakin, and how he later turned into Darth Vader, just like how Lucifer the angel later turned into the devil Satan. Both Lucifer and Anakin had so many similarities, like the mystery behind how they were created, their ideological differences for whom they are serving. For Anakin, the dissatisfaction with the Jedi, whilst for Lucifer, the dissatisfaction with God. Not to mention both of them were quite ambitious, prideful, and arrogant. And of course, both Lucifer and Anakin went through a physical transformation as they fell into the dark side. Even the concept of the Force is inspired by spiritual beliefs from various religions worldwide, as stated by George Lucas in his interview with Charlie Rose. The Force is introduced by George Lucas because he believes that, quote, religions are human psychological beliefs that have been put together to build a society, quote. This is to highlight how much he put into the world building behind Star Wars. There were also references underlying the political themes we see in history. You see, Palpatine orchestrated the Clone Wars, and using this crisis, he granted himself emergency powers. Just like how Mr. You-Know-Who used the Enabling Act to grant himself more power after orchestrating the Reichstag fire. Palpatine militarizes the Republic with the introduction of the Clone Army, which again highlights the reoccurring political theme of the rise in authoritarian power when facing political issues. As stated by George Lucas, quote, "How do democracies get turned into dictatorships? Because democracies aren't overthrown, they are given away," quote. Not to mention George Lucas's obvious disdain for President Nixon, which influenced his takes on the character of Palpatine. He emphasized how both Palpatine and Nixon, quote, subverted the Senate and took over as this imperial guy, and he was really evil, but he pretended to be a nice guy, quote. Star Wars, as something that portrays both George Lucas's philosophy and social criticism and how one's environment affects one's art, makes the prequels a worthwhile to watch. This is The Analyst, and it was a pleasure to join you all. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and may the Force be with you.